That's right. Back at it again. Full custom hot dog here, baby. And we're going to be doing a movie review. That's right. I thought this would be a fantastic return to form, since we'll be talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022. That's right. An infamous little film. Okay, maybe not infamous, but I feel like the internet and I get maybe just Twitter was talking about it ad nauseum. People were excited, maybe surprised they liked it more than they did. How did it fare with me? Well, we'll talk about it here in a moment. Directed by David Blue Garcia, who I'm not too familiar with his previous work. However, it is written and produced by Fetty, Alvarez. If Fetty at least got a story by credit, if you don't know Fetty, he also did Don't Breathe and the Evil Dead remake. Some solid stuff, and a lot of the things he gets his hands on has this look I really like of this dirty, gritty gore. I don't know how else to describe it. It's always kind of gross, like a place you don't want to wake up in, and then there's also blood everywhere. That's just kind of what Fetty does. He does it really well. Like I said, I like the looks of his films. And the writing usually feels okay, and especially in the case of those Don't Breathe movies, there's some fun twists along the way. So what is this about? Well, this takes place 50 years after the initial Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and there's a group of youth, some influencers who pick up a Texas town and they want to turn it into their own little utopia. So they're going to auction it off to some of their influencer friends, but there's an orphanage with an old woman in there. And that happens to be the home of Leatherface, which we'll talk about because this is a weird thing. But the woman ends up dying as they kind of harass her for the deed to the house because they don't believe she lives there. And Leatherface is now driven by revenge. And he puts the massacre back in Texas Chainsaw Massacre as he cuts through the town's new citizens. And this, of course, attracts the attention of none other than Sally Hardesty.
50 years I've been waiting for this night. Just to see him again.
Now a Texas Ranger who's ready for revenge. So a few things that need to be touched upon throughout this plot here, and I'm not going to get too... I'll get a little spoilery. Fuck it. It's been out for a while. You should have seen it already if you're watching this. If not, stop it, come back. But one of the big discrepancies that a lot of people talks about is, how does Leatherface get to the orphanage? This takes place after the original, so it's assumed that he wanders into the town of Harlow, and he just joins up this orphanage as this big dude. Now, Leatherface could never have passed for a kid. Maybe 20. I give him 20. I think he could pass for a 20-year-old if he just wandered in, some big ugly dude, but not a kid. Also, his face isn't all jacked up. I feel like in the first one, he's a little gross looking. But in this one, what you kind of see of him, he looks just like some old dude. But it's odd. That doesn't really make sense. It's supposed to be assumed, I guess, that they retcon his age. So then you have a child committing the atrocities of the original Texas Chainsaw. I don't know. I don't know what they were trying to do. But if you can overlook that, the rest of the movie is a fun time. However, this thing with Leatherface that we're getting hung up on, what happened to the rest of the family? They don't tell you what happens to the cook. They don't tell you what happens to the hitchhiker. There's no other indications of anything else with the family, which the stinger at the end, spoiler alert, is he walks up to the original house, which I can only assume is because of his state of just panic. He doesn't know where else to go. That's his safe haven. But I also think he probably would have gone there at some other point in his life, not just, this isn't the first time in 50 years I would think he comes back. One of the other weird spots of this film is Sally, who in every other sequel is portrayed as just being ultimately just full of trauma after what happened, and rightly so, as it's utterly terrifying what happens in the original. And then in this one, she's super tough. She's super badass and is almost dumb. She traps some of the survivors in her own car while she goes to deal with Leatherface. As much as she would like revenge, I feel like she would probably be a little more empathetic to what they're going through and try to get them out. But no, That's a big old scene and a big old to do. And Sally, like I mentioned, is battle hardened and a Texas Ranger. There's a few similarities here with another film that had a sequel, a requel, whatever you want to call it, that occurs much later. And of course, I'm talking about Halloween. There are some parallels here, right? Got two franchises picking up several years later, and both are featuring their heroines. What makes Sally's appearance less impactful is it is not played by the original actor. It's played by Olwen Forer. I don't know how to pronounce that. She was in Mandy. That's where I mainly know her from, of course, a big Mandy head here. And she does fine, I guess. You're trying to interpret a character from 50 years ago? I don't know. Okay. Sure, you did fine as this. It could have just been a different character. It was very unnecessary, and they obviously did it to tie it in. You could have written her out entirely and pretty much had the same movie. One of the other things that gets me about this film is a lack of dinner scene. I love the dinner scene. I look forward to it. Some family time in the kitchen. However, there is no family, which is another thing missing from this Texas Chainsaw Massacre. However, what you do get is a bunch of gore, some genuinely fun effects, some good jump scares. I watched this with my family when it came out, and they were screaming. They were going nuts at how hard in the paint Leatherface goes, as this may be the first time we really see just a wrathful Leatherface, which I kind of like, which is one of the things that make me appreciate this film and like it maybe more than other people. I like that for one of the first times Leatherface feels like a real serious threat whose motive is just pure kill and destruction. It doesn't feel like he's all silly. There is some of that drag stuff. Nothing too crazy though, and it's definitely not played for laughs, kind of like in some of the other ones. But he's definitely full of malice and anger. And I like that side of Leatherface, considering it's different than what we've gotten. And that's kind of one way to add a dimension onto a character that we're already very familiar with. And one of the things I noticed when this came out too is a lot of people were talking about like, oh, the politics. This is a pro-gun movie. This is a this movie's pro-school shooting movie. But then I saw a lot of people are saying, no, this is an anti-gun. I don't think this movie has a particular message at all. I think it's just saying here's the story. I don't think every horror film or every film even has to necessarily have a message. Of course, it's up to you and the viewer individually to interpret. It doesn't necessarily come with any message in hand. There is some bits where one of the survivors, or there are lead characters, Lila, she's a survivor of a school shooting, and then because they are in Texas, there's of course a dude with a big old truck, a big old gun, and she kind of flirts with the idea of holding the gun and stuff like that, and of course that has to get resolved in some way. But I never feel like that really brings any kind of clarity or closure to the event that she survived. I don't think that really impacted her surviving the school shooting in any way. I don't feel like it did. None of that stuff felt impactful. I was just there to watch Leatherface cut shit up with a chainsaw, and it happens. That infamous scene of that guy saying, you're gonna be canceled, buddy, when Leatherface gets on the bus. That is the massacre.
Try anything and you're canceled, bro.
Oh, fuck. Maybe one of the first massacres we've ever seen in a Texas Chainsaw movie, but it's also a fantastic scene where Leatherface is just going nuts, fish in a barrel, boom, 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 cutting people down, cutting through this party bus, which if you've ever been on a party bus and you have social anxiety, you probably want to do too, because it is a terrifying experience. Another thing some people were talking about, which I don't think is a big deal, was that this was another Texas Chainsaw shot in Bulgaria, the prior one being the Leatherface standalone prequel, also shot in Bulgaria. I think both of those films make great use of their environments, as it kind of looks like a fantasy version of what someone might think Texas looks like, but just kind of off, like a weird mirror world version of Texas. And I like that a lot. I think that's something that works very well with the franchise. I think that's 3 Texas Chainsaws that were not shot in Texas now. I think it was those 2, and then the Texas Chainsaw 3 was shot in California, I think anyway. Besides that, solid movie overall. I think I gotta give it a recommend. It's better than you would expect, especially because a lot of people equate Netflix with hot garbage. Rightly so, by the way. You've also got a great soundtrack by Colin Stetson, someone who I hadn't heard about until this film. He also did Hereditary and Color Out of Space, and the soundtrack is very, very reminiscent of Johan Johansson, who also did things like Mandy and Arrival. And like I mentioned, Stetson did the soundtrack to Color Out of Space, which also sound very much like Mandy. So I don't know if that's his own sound that he just started refining, or if that's the sound of him aping the works of Johan Johansson, which is still good. The soundtracks are great, and not to take away from it, but I kind of want to pick up the soundtrack on its own, as I like that. I really like that sound a lot. All in all, enjoyable film. Who knows if it's going to go anywhere? I'm hoping it does. I will always watch any Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I know there were talks about like a TV series at one point, a Leatherface series. You can do a whole lot with Texas Chainsaw. It's just people having to be willing to do it, and hopefully the audience is receptive. If you ask me, I don't think there's really been a bad one yet. The only ones I haven't enjoyed are the remakes and the prequel to the remake. Those are the ones I didn't really care for. That's a whole other video entirely, though. I am your host, Full Custom Hot Dog. You could follow me on Twitter. It's Full Custom Hot Dog without the last because that's just too long for Twitter. So thank you all for watching, and until next time. If you like what you see,
I love what I see.
make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell for notifications so you can watch whatever comes next. And if you like the music you hear, you can follow me on SoundCloud and Spotify. Check the description for links.